Okay. Um, we're trying to see another point we need to consider when we use the HD curve in explaining the contrast. We have seen that the contrast of an HD curve is simply the gradient of that curve. Whereas speed has got to do with shift, maybe positional change along the x-axis, But for contrast, it has got to do with change in the stiffness of the slope. That is whether the slope is been tilted more forward or more backward. So a graph that has maybe you have two curves. Okay, let me share this. I think I have something on that. Okay. So we have this particular graph. We have two graphs here, of course, from two different things. So graph A and then graph B. Clearly, you can see that because graph A has a steeper slope, steeper gradient, it is going to give us a better contrast. It's going to give us a better contrast. B is not going to give us, it's going to give us a theme or whatever, a reading with less contrast. So the radiologists might find it difficult to maybe, if it were to be mammography, it would be very, very difficult using film B because the contrast will be will be low. And of course, in mammography, we need anything that is going to help us with very, very good, not just a contrast, so what's it called, a spatial resolution. So we have an A here. For this A, we have defined these 2 points. Maybe it's from 0.5 to around 2.5. 0.5 to 2.5. These are normal. We have a thing, we just straight instead of doing any 0.5 plus and 4 plus B, all those stuff. We just go straight and they have these two values, 2.5. In any case, for this particular explanation, it's a general. We have a 2.0.5 and we want to look at something that is very, very important. Look at this A, curve A. Curve A between this 0.5 and then 2.5. If you want to consider this optical density, it's going to have a range of gamma, a range of exposure that it can accommodate. For you to be able to measure optical density of 0.5 and 2.5, curve A is going to only accommodate this range of values, this range of exposure values. As you can see, it's around maybe 5 microgray to around maybe 15 or so microgray. But for this one that I have the lower contrast, you can see the range of value it is going to accommodate. You can see from this point to this point, from this point 2.5 to this, from 0.5 to this 2.5. You can see the whole range of value it can accommodate. So around maybe around 3, 4, around 5 to around 20 something. So this range of values, that is a range of exposure that is associated with these two different things, is called the latitude of the film. The latitude of the film. That is A, latitude B is bigger than latitude A. Though A has a better contrast because it is steeper. It's going to give us But at the end of the day, this one has a latitude B. I mean, this one has the one that has better contrast has lower latitude. How do these terms, or how does this term come in? What's its relevance in radiography, in conventional radiography? A film that has a low latitude is not too good in radiography, because it can only accommodate few range of exposure. And in radiography, we use a whole range of exposure. If we we won't we won't buy a particular film. Maybe you now have several films, maybe 10 packs of film, just because of a particular, just because of a radiography. It is not cost effective. It is only you buy a particular film and you use it for all the patients, all the cases that one encounters. You are not going to be picking, okay, I want to use this particular film for this patient because I need, I'll be using this exposure range. I'll be using 80 kVp, I'll be using 20 MAS and so on. You get another patient, which film will I use? You now calculate, blah, blah, blah. I should use film A, I should use film B. Another patient comes up and this patient, no. This patient, for us to have this good exposure, let's use, I also want a good contrast. Let's use this particular film. So to avoid all those things, we need a film that has a very, very good latitude, that is a good range, so that it can accommodate a range of the values of exposure we are going to use in that diagnostic range. If you don't do that, at the end of the day, we will now have to be doing so many retakes. You now have, you take this film, you get it, you see that it doesn't give you a very good radiograph. You now need to be altering the exposure level. At the end of the day, one will just unnecessarily overdose the patient, and at the end of course, because you are retaking, you are wasting a film. It also amounts to economic waste. So for that, it is good to use a film. First of all, the major thing you consider is the latitude, and of course, and not forgetting the contrast also. A film should have a good contrast, but more importantly, it should have a very good latitude, so that it can accommodate the diagnostic range of exposure that we encounter in general radiography. Except for some other, like in mammography, where we have special films. We have special films for that have good contrast, and of course, because the latitude is low, you can accommodate just very range. We don't use a very, very high range of exposure in mammography. We use a very, very small thing. So the film can strictly be one that has a very, very high contrast, and of course manageable latitude, because the range of exposure in mammography is not too it's not too wide. So that is that about HD curve and contrast. The contrast is a very, very important term. I mean, a very, very important consideration, but we also look at the latitude. Such a film that has a good contrast and presents. If it doesn't present a film, if it doesn't present a very, very good latitude, then you could as well discard it. So let's continue. So films with a lower latitude have higher take rates than the one that have high latitude. So I just saw one of the charts. Somebody asked about F. Thank you for the question. I think somebody also answered it. F is actually 4. I thought, trying to rush some things, we can also go back to read up. And how B is the best, and so on and so forth. So that is that. We now look at the whole film screen system as a whole. The film screen system. The film, we don't buy, and we are purchasing a screen film, blah, blah, blah. They are bought together, the film and the screen that matches it. They are bought together. But there are so many things we need to consider. We need to consider the film that is sensitive to a particular light that will be given off by the screen. Because the light, the screen, the X-ray affects the screen and it gives off light, blah, blah, blah. The light that will now affect this film emotion. We need to consider which light is transparent to that film. Some films, some screens give off green light, and then the film has to be such that it will be transparent to the green light. That is, the green light will affect it, so on and so forth. In the earlier days, blue, I think red light was not sensitive to the film. The film used then. Red light was it sensitive. So many times, polychromatic and then also monochromatic and so on and so forth. Some films, they only respond to a particular range of light. I mean, a particular color of light. The light we have, the light has a continuous spectrum of so many colors. Then there are primary colors. You can have red, orange, yellow, green, blah blah blah, indigo, and so on and so forth. So the light coming off from that particular screen must be the one that the film responds to. If not, we won't have a very, very good radiograph at the end of the day. So that is why it is good for us to always buy a film screen system at the same time, not film from Kodak, this thing from Agfa, and one begins to combine. It is not so. But of course, this is Nigeria at times. We want to cut costs, which is of course understandable, but not at the expense of a very good and quality radiograph at the end of the day. So it is not advised, except such a screen, such a film advice can and has a list of maybe products or maybe companies that you can get films from. Maybe you have bought a film, a screen. You have so many other companies that their films are compatible with that particular. If we have that, then we can go on and then combine the two. But ordinarily, film, screen cannot combine from different vendors. So before we so I want to briefly also look at this reciprocity law. 957, okay. We'll be able to finish everything in less than 1 hour. So we have this reciprocity law. Reciprocity law. Reciprocity law. If you have for a particular optical density, no matter the amount of exposure and at a particular no matter the amount of exposure rate, if you have for a particular exposure, let's say you are looking at 2 micrograde. I'm looking at 2 micrograde. 2 micrograde. 2 micrograde. We should have the same OD for this exposure, or for this dose. Let's say exposure. Exposure is a millirange, but let's understand it. Exposure is a measure in ranking. Anyway, let's just assume this is exposure. This is dose anyway. So we have for this exposure, we should have the same optical density, no matter the rate at which we get this. How do I mean? At times you can have an exposure, a high exposure rate. For example, we are looking at a car traveling a particular distance, maybe 100 kilometers. Some cars can do the 100 kilometers in 1 hour. Some cars can do it in 30 minutes. Some cars can do it in 45 minutes, and so on and so forth. So we want to look at this as a distance covered. So the distance and covered shouldn't affect the, let's say, the comfort or whatever I mean, the rate at which we cover this particular distance shouldn't affect maybe the comfort of the people inside the vehicle, or those going at the 40 kilometers, 100 kilometers, so on and so forth. The comfort shouldn't be disturbed at all. So this is the reciprocity law. That is, this will give us an optical density of a particular value, a particular OD, maybe OD of 3.2. No matter the range, the rate at which this is gotten, no matter the rate at which we have this value of the exposure, because some you can have exposure at a particular rate, maybe 2 microgram per hour. It's going to give us a particular time to have this. You can have 4 microgram. No, no, okay, microgram per hour. Okay. Yes, microgram per hour. You can have 4, you can have 5 microgram per hour. So, irrespective of the rate at which we get this exposure, the rate at which we come about this exposure, we should have an optical density of 3.2. But that does not happen always. So that brings us to reciprocity law failure. Reciprocity law failure. The law states that no matter the exposure rate, the exposure should be the same for no matter the exposure rate, we should have the same optical density for the same exposure. So if you have an OD, these are OD, all our OD axis, we now have a time. If you have something like a straight line, no matter the time, blah, 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 if you have a particular OD, maybe 3.5, but that doesn't happen. So at times, you can have an OD curve of so that at a higher exposure, we have an OD lesser than the one we are looking at, and at a lower exposure. So at this point, we have the reciprocity law failure, which is this is usually an issue in mammography, where we want to use a very, very short time in getting a particular exposure. So it can lead to reciprocity law failure. So you can see if you have this should actually be, no matter the time we have used for the exposure, we should have the same optical density. At times it can be slightly higher or slightly lower, but when it goes beyond the particular range, it can have the reciprocity law failure. And I said it is an issue when we come to a mammography. I think let's see the range. We have that in mammography. It's a case in mammography, especially when we want to image dense or very, very thick breast. You know, you now begin to require long exposure time. In that case, you have this failure begins to take its toll on whatever we are doing. So mammography is a special case in which the reciprocity law failure is a very, very it's a very, very big issue. So we have so I want to look at contrast and dose in radiography. Contrast and dose in radiography. Contrast and then dose. For our next lesson, get a better matter. Better matters. Sorry about this stuff. So I want to look at contrast and dose in radiography. There are so many factors that determine how much dose and how much contrast you're going to have in a particular radiograph. Of course, we know how much dependence, how contrast is dependent on the KVP. If we begin to lower the KVP, we begin to have a better contrast. As you begin to have contrast, it also comes at an expense in those. I want to also know the relationship between those and then AVP, between those and then MA, between those and then time, between those and MAS, and so on and so forth. All these factors, all these things, they are operated at the console. The radiographer operates all these parameters of the KVP, I'll set them KVP, MA, time, that is S, and some have an MES. These are the parameters that are controlled at the operator console. And all these go a long way. They determine the contrast and the dose in a radiography. If you have an increase in MA, you're going to have increase in dose. You increase MAS, you're going to have increase in dose. Or you increase this value, you're going to have an increase in dose. Therefore, KVP, if you reduce the KVP, you're going to have an enhanced contrast. That is the key thing used in a mammography. That uses KVP of around 15 to maybe around 45 maximum, because at this level, you're going to have a very, very good contribution of photoelectric emission. Photoelectric emission has got to do with lower for tissue. We have the photoelectric emission and the puncturing and scattering. They become equal around 26 kVp. 26 kVp. They are exactly equal for tissue. Then for bone, you begin to go around close to around 35. For bony structures, around 35, the two photoelectric emission and puncturing scattering begin to become equal. So for soft tissue, and if you want to look at this value 15 to 45, we want to base it there because photoelectric emission of photoelectric effect will not be enhanced at this point. So we're going to have a very, very, very good contrast. But as you reduce KVP, or as you reduce KVP, it is going to come at an expense of an MAS. Because as you, if you're using, of course, most systems they use AEC, automatic exposure control. As you reduce the MAS, as you reduce the KVP to achieve good contrast, you're going to have an increase in dose, because if you are reducing the KVP, the system will want to increase the MAS so that more photons will be used in forming an image with a very, very good OD, have a very good OD. So as you reduce the MAS, it also comes at the expense of increase in dose. At a particular, it is not very linear. At some point in time, the graph will do something most likely going down again. Relationship between the MAS and the KVP and those. All these are value, they contribute. They have to, especially a radiographer that is still new, might need a technique chart close to the computer, to the console, so that, of course, when he needs and wants to image a pediatrics, of course, we need to use a lower KVP, lower, use everything, so on and so forth. So if he or he has the KVP, the technique chart and close to the wall, you can see the combinations of KVP, blah, 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 that should give a very, very good result. But with time, the experienced radiographer would have known that, oh, this is what I need when I see an obese patient. These are the parameters, these are the factors I need to impute or to have a very good radiogram. So that the retake rates be seriously reduced. So these are all the blah, 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 blah. So we now quickly go to start validation. And again, patient, I didn't mention the patient side. Patient side also affects everything. The more the patient size, the more the KVP we should use, the more the MAS for better, for more number of photons to be used, and of course for better penetrability of the dose. Of the energy of the X-ray. Thicker patients require higher KDP so that you can have a better penetrating photon to be able to reach the photographic template. So we have scattered radiation. Want to reduce the scattered radiation as much as possible in scattered radiation. So it's something we want to reduce as much as possible. And the major thing that contributes to scatter radiation is the Compton scatter, because the photon is scattered, and giving rise to the, the Compton electron and so on and so forth. So it is the major reason why we have them reduce them contrast in lithography. Compton scatter. If there's a way we reduce that or eliminate it, well and good. But unfortunately, it can't be eliminated, especially when the KVP begins to be elevated as 50. And unfortunately, countries that predominates as the temperature, sorry, as the KVP increases, that lower this thing in the soft tissue, lower KVP, the electric emission predominates as it goes from 40 upwards, even up to how many megaelectron volts. Quantum scattering is also there. The range of the range used in therapeutic radiography and therapeutic radiology is studying radiotherapy. So we want to reduce scattering as much as possible. If we reduce the amount of scattering, especially in a fluoroscopy, whereby the the fluoroscopist or maybe the neurosurgeon or the orthopedic surgeon, as the case may be, might need to be inside with the patient. So reduction in scatter radiation is also a way of reducing the dose the physician absorbs, no matter what. Because at times, because most times, one wouldn't want to wear so many heavy clothing that have been inundated with so much lead. To be very bulky, and their movements will be very restricted. Want something, also want to perform an operation, want to insert catheter, blah blah blah, anything, stents, blah. So we want to reduce the amount of time spent in that. So it is very to be cumbersome to wear heavy. So the way to at least reduce that is to reduce the amount of scattered radiation on the patient. That is why it is advised to have the tube underneath, while the image intensifier or the flat panel of the tube under, so that the lead drape there will cover blah blah blah. But if you have the tube up, the scatter radiation from the patient will just hit every part of the radiologist, the fluoroscopist, the neurosurgeon, or the orthopedic surgeon at so many, especially from up down to eyes, and even though he or she wears, of course, and some other PPEs, protective and personal protective equipment. So we want to reduce that scatter radiation as much as possible. And one of the means of doing that is by using anti-scatter grid. Anti-scatter grid is one of the tools I'm using in reducing radiation, scattered radiation. And of course, it is in a modern radiography machines, always have it very in front of above the sensor for digital whatever, then above the plate, the screen system, blah blah blah, for ordinary for conventional radiography. So it is always there in all new systems. The grid is always there to reduce the scatter reaching the photographic plate or reaching the pin. Because if they reach the pin, they are going to cause much more blurring of the image. So we have to reduce it as much as possible. So with that, we use um, grids. We use grids to make that come about. And the grids are simply, yeah, just simply times. Just a two-dimensional grid. So this is just a two-dimensional. These are just these are lead. They are lead blocks, lead strips of pipes or whatever. This one there, lead. And this is the interspace. Inter, interspace width. Whereas this length is is the height. So for so if you have this is the way scatter grids reject. Okay. If you have a particular scatter event, you have the photon coming here, now scattered different angles. Instead of reaching the photographic template here, if you don't have this, all of this will reach the photographic template. All of this will reach this photographic template or the cassette. But if you have this, now this one, only few, okay, this one might just reach it. Only few will reach it. Whereas every other scattered photon will be absorbed by this lead. Lead. So this is going to reduce the amount of scattered photon, which actually don't contribute anything to our radiograph. What they do, they're just there to degrade the image. So with strips and with grids, with lead and grids, we have a greater amount of scatter rejection. We have too much scattered photons that wouldn't reach our image receptor. So with that, it's an increase. But this comes at a price, in the sense that since you're going to reduce the amount of photon that we'll be using, that will affect this, it will require that much more because the sensor is very close by. The sensor, the photographic plate is there. The sensor which is attached to, which is the AEC, will now detect lesser X-rays. I mean, lesser photons are falling on it. Since it is looking at a particular OD, because the AEC is such that it is looking at a particular optical density. If that optical density is not reached, all it does is it will now make more exposure to instead of using two microgrid. At the end of the day, you might want to, because of the amount of scatter that would have been rejected, scatter the photons that would have been rejected, the gray, the exposure will now be increased by automatically adjusting all those values, KBP, blah, 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 to increase the amount of exposure that we follow. So it means that much more the patient that is here, that is up here, we now, of course, because of the patient here that we now have so much of this data. With that, we now have much more exposure on this patient. So the invitation of this grid, the presence of a grid actually increases the radiation dose to the patient. And we can't do anything about that. So it's just that it has to be there. At least we are looking at a very, very good image. If it's not there, at the end of the day, we want to save the patient by giving a lower, making the patient receive a lower exposure At the end of the day, you might have to take 2 or 3 exposure by changing. So it means at the end of the day, we end up wasting our fees. Of course, though this for screen film system, even for conventional, for digital like this thing, you get this thing. So that is why digital at times is one has to be very, very careful when dealing with the digital technology. Because since you're not using film, you just look it on the screen. Ah, it's not clear. Yeah, take another one. The patient goes there. Yeah, stay. Let me take another one. Yeah. You press the button, take another again. Look it on the screen. It's not very clear. Ah, oh yeah, madam. Oh yeah, stay well. You take another one. So for digital radiography, this thing is a bit of a problem. The, the the grid there is a bit of a problem. Even apart from the grid, we have to be sure, we have to have well-trained radiographers and to handle the screen, especially digital radiography, because since you wouldn't be needing film, you wouldn't be replacing films, and because if we begin to replace film, begin to ask the question, why are you retaking this in so much time? You have to answer to that. Since this one, digital radiography is just there, blah, blah, blah. So the grid is there. The presence of grid increases the dose the patient is going to receive because of the rejection of so many of these scattered photons who would have ordinarily been an incident on the receptor, which of course wouldn't yield any image um, due to the um, due to the event happening at a particular distance, just a scattered distance. But in the end, it's good to help us with good image quality. So apart from this, we have some modalities like for pediatrics. They don't normally use grid. Want to image some pediatric maybe infants. So it's usually advised to remove the grid and then make use of other measures of reducing scatter. So with grids, there's always a grid, a particular term that okay, I have less than 1 minute. So we'll do that after this timeout. Just join in no time from now. I want to close this and start off with the concluding session.